明天的中国，奋斗创造奇迹。苏轼有句话：犯其至难，而图其至远。
Aside from its sheer size, China's economy is among the most significant in the world due to its trade relations with other nations, vast foreign exchange reserves, its foreign policies, and of course its population, which accounts for 1/5 of all people on the planet. The Asian giant is infamous for falsifying economic data and the welfare of the average Chinese. But why should a nation of such standing be accused of such deception? What incentives are there for the Chinese government to do just that? Join us as we find out if China lies about its economy. For starters, different levels of government may manipulate economic data from Chinese agencies to provide a more favorable view of Chinese economic prosperity. This could include anything from exaggerating output figures to falsifying employment data. Different tiers of the Chinese government would attempt to achieve this for a variety of very rational reasons, including increasing money for regional initiatives, winning the favor of party officials by achieving success and on a global scale, projecting a powerful image to both potential allies and foes. But misrepresenting economic data and giving credit where it isn't actually due would have a negative influence on millions of people's quality of life in China. So every sort of scientist, even social scientists like economists, must take the quality, precision, and relevance of the data and information they are working with into consideration while evaluating the material. For instance, there are some rather big differences between UN and IMF GDP data. The reason for this is that each of these organizations uses very different methods to gather and process the data needed to estimate GDP figures, demonstrating that there is a great deal of latitude in how such information should be interpreted, even when dealing with an extremely open and trustworthy nation. Also, these data really commit a second error for which economists should watch out. They exaggerate their level of precision. An organization would never be able to calculate the overall output of any country's economy to the nearest $1 million. However, the way they presented their numbers up to this point may have misled the reader about how accurate they actually are. Yes, GDP figures are excellent for that, but if you really want to understand living standards or the scale of the economy, these numbers really aren't all that relevant, at least not right now, without more information. Apart from deceiving you into learning a little bit about statistics, it's crucial to comprehend the correctness, precision, and relevancy of everything you see, because even if they aren't deliberately falsifying their records, there is a potential that they may have been carefully chosen to mislead you. Small inaccuracies like this can balance themselves out if the persons gathering and processing the data are not biased in any way, especially if the data points are gathered widely and in huge numbers. Besides, for all levels of government in China, there is a very strong motive to select individuals who project a more positive image. Even beyond that, it is challenging to acquire accurate GDP figures from sources outside the nation whose metrics you want to measure. It's important to note that the World Bank has historically used the statistical capacity score to keep track of each nation's capacity to generate reliable economic data. The issue of the Chinese government cover-up infamously blew up in the 1990s. In a leaked comment, a prominent Chinese government official acknowledged that the GDP figures were carefully padded in the right places. It's fairly obvious to most economists that yes, due to a combination of data collection challenges, incompetence, corruption, and willful manipulation, that yes, Chinese economic figures are unreliable and they are overestimated rather than underestimated. This lack of transparency is actually worse than the blatantly false figures because it's harder to know what those adjustments were. But as for economic production, this formula is quite simple. Consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports. And you don't have to be a genius to know the economic performance of low and middle income countries are typically substantially lower than that of advanced nations. But it does make sense that developing nations struggle to produce reliable economic data. So how can reliable estimates be made? The Communist Party official Li Kai-cheng, who acknowledged that their GDP estimates were fabricated, stated very openly that the only 3 factors he considered when assessing the economy were the amount of power consumed, the volume of rail freight, and the amount of bank lending. A highly productive economy uses more electricity, transports more goods via rail, and extends more credit for different enterprises. there's a good chance it's producing more. Luis Martinez of the University of Chicago has published a research that sheds light on the extent to which autocratic governments may be inflating their estimates of gross domestic product, the widely used indicator of an economy's size and strength. Dr. Martinez, a professor of the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago, claimed that all of it results in light. There are more homes, factories, and streetlights as an economy grows. A distinct trend became apparent as he examined the data on nighttime lighting. In free and democratic nations, GDP and nighttime lighting are closely correlated. According to the U.S. nonprofit organization Freedom House, which monitors the state of democracy around the world and is supported by the U.S. State Department. However, in many unfree nations, autocracies, and dictatorships, the government declared that the economy was expanding considerably more quickly than the power coverage and duration. These autocratic administrations often reported GDP growth each year that was around 35% greater than what would be predicted based on the sluggish expansion of their nightlights. The GDP is manipulated, either for propaganda purposes or perhaps because no one likes to bring bad news to a tyrant. Try Kim Jong-un. Here is a satellite image of South Korea, whose GDP is $1.8 trillion, and here is one of North Korea, whose GDP is currently at $29 billion. See the stark difference. But a broad overview of the Chinese economy shows that even the most damning estimates allow us to go backwards from this and discover that the national output is actually closer to $9 trillion than the official figures of $17.7 trillion. It remains the second largest economy in the world despite this. The GDP per capita figure is one that's interesting in this case, since it's the real reason the Chinese government felt obligated to fabricate these numbers in the first place. But the idea that people are giving up some freedoms in exchange for a seat in the world's fastest growing economy has played a significant role in enabling the dictatorial antics of the CCP to continue. China has a GDP per capita of slightly over $10,000, but if we make the suggested adjustments, that figure might drop as low as $4,500, which would bring a sizable portion of the country back below the international poverty line. The result is a 3 out of 10. The majority of non-output elements that contribute to stability and confidence include political stability, just like legal systems, militaristic ambitions, and reliance on specific industries. These figures have arguably grown so far from reality because of the process by which they continue to expand. 6 out of 10 here. If you lie about growth rates for a year, you have to keep lying about them. And after a few decades, the country finds itself in a situation where some experts think its output is up to twice as high as it actually is. The terrible thing is that China doesn't need to exaggerate these numbers. They are still impressive. Even with the most conservative predictions, their growth score still ranges from a 10 over 10 to an 8 over 10. Industry is also unaffected because according to all economists, the USA is the only country with a greater global capacity for manufacturing, construction, and service-based industries than China. So it still receives a perfect score of 10. Overall, China has an adjusted score of 7.4 out of 10, which is still quite outstanding, much like its own economy. And according to the most recent official data, China's economy grew by 3% in 2022, which was one of its slowest rates in decades. Even more concerning for the long-term outlook of the economy is the fact that the population of the nation decreased last year for the first time since the beginning of 1960, dropping by 850,000 to 1.412 billion. Currently, Beijing is now placing its bets on a strong recovery in economic activity. According to some government advisors, the central leadership will probably announce a growth target of 5% to 5.5% for 2023 at the upcoming legislative sessions in March. These are the kinds of rates required for China to achieve its long-term goal of doubling the size of its economy by 2035. Mr. Xi has demonstrated some openness to change policy in recent weeks after securing a third 5-year term in office. He abruptly abandoned his zero-COVID policy, which included strict lockdowns and mass testing over the past month. He also loosened financing requirements for real estate developers and gave orders to subordinates to indicate the end of the government's regulatory crackdown on the private tech sector. Where do you think China's economy will be in 5 years? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more amazing updates. See you next time.